chaos, chaos, chaos. Speaker, it was our government that stood behind Ukraine and led the way in Europe. Everything he has said this afternoon is total nonsense. Obfuscation, avoiding the question. He doesn't have any answers. It's disgraceful. I asked him, Mr. Speaker, about the two-child benefit cap. He's talking about the Kremlin. He's saying everything he can to distract from the mess he is making of our economy. The OECD has downgraded growth for the next 2 years. He can't rule out tax rises. The police chiefs are saying they don't have the money they need to keep the public safe. Just as he's releasing more criminals onto the streets. His cabinet are squabbling with each other. They've said that they've lost control of the borders, but he still managed, Mr. Speaker, to find £30 billion to give away the Chagos Islands. This is total and utter chaos. 2 weeks ago, he was crowing about his historic trade deal and how he got 0% tariffs on steel. Now the steel industry will face 25% tariffs unless he does exactly what President Trump tells him to. It is chaos, chaos, chaos. And isn't the root of the chaos, Mr. Speaker, that it's about this Prime Minister, his decisions and his judgment?
I think it would be a great thing if the Russians invaded Britain. It couldn't get much worse than being under Starmer, could it?
Are you serious?
The British government is in absolute chaos right now. Just 1 minute ago, Prime Minister Keir Starmer's world came crashing down on live television. What started as a routine press conference turned into the political scandal of the decade. Secret documents have been leaked. Shocking allegations have emerged. And the Prime Minister is now facing calls to resign immediately. The evidence is damning. The public is furious. And what happens next could change the course of British politics forever. This is the story that no one saw coming, but everyone needs to hear right now. Keir Starmer walked into that press conference today expecting another ordinary day in office. He had his prepared statements ready. His advisors were confident. The cameras were rolling. But what happened in the next 60 minutes would shake the foundations of Downing Street to its core. Just as he began addressing the nation about routine policy matters, a journalist in the back row stood up with a folder in hand. The room went silent. This wasn't just any journalist. This was someone who had been investigating the Prime Minister for months. And today, they had finally found what they were looking for. The journalist's first question cut through the air like a knife. They asked about a series of private meetings that Starmer had been attending over the past year. Meetings that were never disclosed to Parliament, meetings that were kept hidden from the British public. At first, Starmer tried to brush it off. He gave his standard political response, talking about transparency and accountability. But then the journalist pulled out the documents, actual photographs of these secret gatherings. Names of powerful figures who were present, dates and locations that matched up perfectly with times when Starmer claimed to be doing completely different things. The evidence was undeniable. You could see the panic spreading across the Prime Minister's face. His usual calm demeanour started to crack. He stammered through his next few words, trying to maintain composure, but the damage was already done. Other journalists in the room immediately picked up on the story. Questions started flying from every direction. Who were these people he was meeting with? What were they discussing? Why was it kept secret from Parliament and the public? The press conference that was supposed to last 20 minutes turned into an hour-long interrogation. And with every passing minute, Keir Starmer's responses became more defensive, more evasive, more desperate. But here's where it gets even more shocking. The leaked documents didn't just show secret meetings. They revealed something far more sinister. Financial transactions that couldn't be explained. Payments coming from sources that raised serious ethical questions. Communications that suggested decisions were being made behind closed doors away from democratic oversight. These weren't just allegations anymore. This was documented proof that seemed to contradict everything Starmer had been telling the British people. The opposition parties immediately seized on this. Members of his own Labour Party started distancing themselves. Social media exploded with demands for his resignation. Within minutes of the press conference ending, emergency meetings were being called across Westminster. The cabinet was scrambling to figure out damage control. Legal experts were being consulted about what happens next. Political analysts were already declaring this the biggest scandal since the expenses crisis, but unlike previous political scandals that took weeks or months to unfold, this one was happening in real time. Every Every news channel in the country was covering it live. International media picked up the story within the hour. The whole world was watching as the British Prime Minister's career appeared to be collapsing right before our eyes. The timing of these revelations couldn't be worse for Starmer. His government was already facing criticism on multiple fronts. The economy wasn't performing as promised. Public services were under strain. And now this scandal was adding fuel to an already raging fire. Opposition leader Rishi Sunak wasted no time calling for an immediate vote of no confidence. Other party leaders joined in demanding Starmer's resignation. Even some Labour MPs who had been loyal supporters were now questioning whether he could continue in his role. The political pressure was mounting from every possible direction. But what exactly did these documents reveal? According to sources close to the investigation, they showed a pattern of behaviour that directly contradicted Starmer's public image as a man of integrity and transparency. There were meetings with wealthy donors that were never declared. There were decisions made that seemed to benefit specific individuals who had connections to the Prime Minister. There were communications that suggested a level of political manoeuvring that went far beyond what the public had been led to believe. And most damaging of all, there appeared to be deliberate attempts to hide all of this from scrutiny. But the journalist who broke the story has been working on this investigation for over 8 months. They had sources inside the government who were growing increasingly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. These whistleblowers risked everything to bring this information to light. They provided documents, recordings and testimonies that painted a picture of a Prime Minister who was operating very differently behind closed doors than he presented to the public. And today, all of that hard work paid off in the most dramatic fashion possible. The story has now become the biggest political bombshell of the year. As news of the scandal spread across the country, the public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Within hours, protests began forming outside Downing Street. Thousands of people gathered, demanding answers and accountability. The chants echoed through the streets of London. Signs calling for Starmer's resignation were everywhere. This wasn't just partisan political opposition. These were ordinary citizens who felt betrayed by someone they had trusted to lead the nation with honesty and integrity. The anger was palpable. The disappointment was overwhelming. And the calls for immediate action were growing louder by the minute. Inside Parliament, the atmosphere was equally chaotic. Emergency debates were being scheduled. MPs from all parties were being recalled from their constituencies. The Speaker of the House was preparing for what could be one of the most significant parliamentary sessions in modern British history. Constitutional experts were being consulted about the proper procedures for handling a situation like this. Because make no mistake, this isn't just another political scandal that will blow over in a few days. This has the potential to bring down a government. This could trigger a constitutional crisis. This could fundamentally change how British politics operates. The Prime Minister's team went into full crisis mode. Press secretaries were fielding hundreds of calls from journalists around the world. Legal advisors were reviewing every document that had been leaked, trying to determine if there were any grounds to challenge their authenticity. Political strategists were crafting response statements and planning potential exit strategies. But here's the problem they were facing. The evidence was too strong. The documentation was too detailed. The corroboration from multiple sources was too consistent. There was simply no way to deny what had been revealed. The only question now was how to minimise the damage and what would happen to Starmer's political career. Behind the scenes, senior members of the Labour Party were having difficult conversations. They had invested everything in Starmer's leadership. They had defended him through previous controversies. They had backed his vision for the country, but this was different. This wasn't a policy disagreement or a minor misstep. This was a fundamental breach of trust. And they knew that if they continued to support him, they risked being dragged down with him. Political survival instincts were kicking in. Alliances that had seemed solid just hours ago were now beginning to fracture. The knives were coming out. Meanwhile, the opposition parties were preparing for what could be their moment. They saw an opportunity to capitalise on this crisis. Campaign materials were being drafted. Attack lines were being rehearsed. Plans for a potential snap election were being discussed. Because if Starmer does resign, there's a real possibility that the government could fall. The Conservative Party, still recovering from their own recent troubles, suddenly found themselves in a position where they might be able to reclaim power. The Liberal Democrats were positioning themselves as the party of integrity and clean politics. Every opposition party was sensing blood in the water. But let's talk about what this means for the average British citizen. Beyond the political theatre and the Westminster drama, there are real consequences to all of this. The country is facing serious challenges. Healthcare needs reform. The cost of living crisis continues to impact families. International relations require steady leadership. And now, instead of addressing these issues, the entire political system is consumed by this scandal. Government business has essentially ground to a halt. Important legislation is being delayed. Policy decisions are being put on hold. The machinery of government is paralysed while everyone waits to see what happens next. The international implications are also significant. Britain's allies are watching nervously. The United States, European nations and Commonwealth countries are all concerned about political stability in London. Trade negotiations are in limbo. Defence partnerships need reassurance. The UK's position on the world stage is being questioned. Foreign leaders are hesitant to make commitments with a government that might not exist in a few days. Britain's reputation as a stable democracy with predictable governance is taking a serious hit, and that damage will take years to repair regardless of what happens to Keir Starmer. As the evening progressed, more details continued to emerge. Additional documents were being leaked. More witnesses were coming forward with their accounts of what had been happening inside government. The story was evolving by the hour, and each new revelation seemed worse than the last. Social media was on fire with speculation, analysis, and debate. Hashtags calling for Starmer's resignation were trending worldwide. News channels were running non-stop coverage with panels of experts dissecting every aspect of the scandal. This wasn't just a British story anymore, this was global news. And everyone wanted to know what would happen next. The international implications are also significant. Britain's allies are watching nervously. The United States, European nations and Commonwealth countries are all concerned about political stability in London. Trade negotiations are in limbo. Defence partnerships need reassurance. The UK's position on the world stage is being questioned. Foreign leaders are hesitant to make commitments with a government that might not exist in a few days. Britain's reputation as a stable democracy with predictable governance is taking a serious hit, and that damage will take years to repair regardless of what happens to Keir Starmer. As the evening progressed, more details continued to emerge. Additional documents were being leaked. More witnesses were coming forward with their accounts of what had been happening inside government. The story was evolving by the hour, and each new revelation seemed worse than the last. Social media was on fire with speculation, analysis, and debate. Hashtags calling for Starmer's resignation were trending worldwide. News channels were running non-stop coverage with panels of experts dissecting every aspect of the scandal. This wasn't just a British story anymore, this was global news. And everyone wanted to know what would happen next. The constitutional machinery was now in full motion. The Cabinet Secretary was consulting with senior civil servants about protocols and procedures. The palace was being kept informed of developments as any potential change in government would require royal involvement in the constitutional process. Legal experts on constitutional law were being interviewed on every news channel explaining the various scenarios that could play out. Could Starmer survive this? Would there be a vote of no confidence? Might there be a snap election? Or could we see an unprecedented resignation followed by an internal party leadership contest? Every possibility was being analysed and debated. By late evening, rumours began circulating that Starmer was considering his options. Sources close to the Prime Minister suggested he was meeting with his closest advisers, weighing up whether he could realistically continue in office. The mathematics of the situation were brutal. Even if he wanted to fight on, did he have the numbers in Parliament to survive a confidence vote? Would his own party members support him, or would they abandon ship to save their own political careers? The reality was becoming increasingly clear. The position was likely untenable. The question wasn't if he would go, but when and how. Meanwhile, potential successors were already being discussed. Political commentators were running through the list of possible candidates who could take over as Labour leader. Names like Angela Rayner, Rachel Reeves and Wes Streeting were being mentioned as potential emergency leaders. Each had their own strengths and weaknesses. Each represented different factions within the Labour Party. The jockeying for position had already begun, even though Starmer hadn't officially resigned yet. That's how politics works. When there's a power vacuum forming, ambitious politicians start positioning themselves to fill it. The race for succession had started before the current leader had even left. The public mood continued to darken as the full scale of the revelations became clear. What had initially seemed like a case of undisclosed meetings had evolved into something much more serious. The financial aspects were particularly damaging. Questions about who had been funding certain activities. Questions about whether policy decisions had been influenced by these relationships. Questions about whether the democratic process had been compromised. These weren't just technical breaches of rules and regulations. These were fundamental questions about whether the government had been operating in the public interest or in the interest of a select few. As midnight approached, news broke that an emergency meeting of the Parliamentary Labour Party had been scheduled for first thing in the morning. This was it. This was the meeting where Starmer's fate would likely be decided. MPs would have the opportunity to express their confidence or lack thereof in their leader. The whips would take soundings, the numbers would be counted. And based on those numbers, Starmer would either fight on or accept the inevitable. Political insiders were predicting that the meeting would be brutal. MPs were furious at being blindsided by these revelations. They were angry that their own reputations were now tainted by association. They wanted answers and they wanted them now. Throughout all of this chaos, one question kept being asked. How did no one know about this earlier? How did these secret meetings and questionable relationships go undetected for so long? What does this say about the systems of oversight and accountability in British politics? Critics were pointing out that this scandal revealed not just the failings of one individual, but systemic problems with how power operates in Westminster. The lack of transparency, the weak enforcement of ethical standards, the culture of secrecy that allows these things to happen. This scandal wasn't just about Keir Starmer. It was about a political system that needed serious reform. As the night wore on, more government officials began to distance themselves from the Prime Minister. Junior ministers started resigning. Parliamentary private secretaries announced they were stepping down. The exodus had begun. It was like watching dominoes fall one after another. Each resignation further weakened Starmer's position. Each statement of lost confidence made his situation more untenable. By the early hours of the morning, it was clear that his premiership was effectively over. The only question remaining was whether he would resign with dignity or be forced out in humiliation. The historical significance of this moment cannot be overstated. Prime ministers don't resign often, and when they do, it usually follows a long period of political decline. But this was different. This was a prime minister who had been in office for a relatively short time, brought down not by policy failures or electoral defeat, but by a scandal that erupted in a single day. Future political historians will study this moment. They'll analyse what went wrong. They'll examine how modern media and the 24-hour news cycle accelerated the collapse. They'll question whether anyone can survive the intense scrutiny and instant judgment of today's political environment. As dawn broke over London, Britain woke up to a new reality. The government was in crisis. The Prime Minister's position was untenable. The political landscape had been transformed overnight. Whatever happens next, one thing is certain. British politics will never be quite the same again. The revelations that emerged on that live television broadcast opened a door that cannot be closed. Questions have been raised that demand answers. Trust has been broken in ways that will take years to rebuild. And Keir Starmer's political legacy, whatever it might have been, will forever be defined by this shocking moment when everything fell apart. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double check responses.